It's a Mailbag Monday. We've got your questions about how to properly evaluate spring training success, Red Sox outfielder Miguel Blythe, Giants outfielder Vaun Brown, and a wild fantasy baseball trade. Let's talk about it.
You are Locked On MLB Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on in to Locked On MLB Prospects, your home for all things minor league baseball. I'm your host, Lindsey Crosby, editor-in-chief of BravesToday.com, baseball writer, podcaster. Thank you for making this your first listen. Every single day, we're proudly part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Ultimate Baseball GM. If you've ever dreamed of becoming an MLB GM and managing your baseball franchise, this is the game for you. To download the game, just visit ultimatebaseballgm.com or look it up in the App Store. Our listeners get a 100% free boost of their franchise when using the promo code LOCKEDON in the game. So, one of the most common questions that we get this time of year, and a lot of the suggestions or a lot of the questions in this episode are about guys who have been impressive in spring training. But one of the most common questions we get is, what is the best way to evaluate spring training success? Because if you've ever been to a spring training game, you know that even if you're able to see a lineup of mostly big league regulars, which is very rare, they don't play the entire game. You'll see mass substitutions in the third, the fifth, the seventh, and by the end of the game, your scorebook is just full of writing where you've swapped out players, sometimes multiple times. And so, kind of going over a lot of the stuff out there from different prospect evaluation websites, kind of my own observations, things like that. Here's really what you should be looking for when you're trying to figure out in spring training, how can I feel about this specific player and what he's done? One, if you're looking for actual, like if you're trying to evaluate stats, so it's not something where you're able to see the games, but you see a very impressive stat line and you want to know how applicable it is, you can go to Baseball Reference. They have this really great tool. If you pull a player's page up, you'll see spring training performance stats. And the very last column on the right is opponent quality. And this is a measure Baseball Reference has done where, in essence, they take everybody who was in the game at that time. So if you are a hitter, this is the pitcher. If you are a pitcher, they take everybody who's in the game at that time, and they look to see the last level that they played in affiliated baseball, and they score it. So this ranges from 1 to 10, and it goes like a 1.5 is the opponent quality is like you are in rookie ball. A 1, it's very rare to see a 1 because the 1 is like, hey, you're a pitcher and the opposing batter you're facing is also a pitcher. So, but 1.5 is rookie ball. A 4 is the equivalent of A ball. 5 is high A. 7 is double A. 8 is triple A. And 10 is there are 9 MLB regulars on the field right now. So it's a useful gauge when you see stats from spring training. You can go and you can look to see how good were the players that this guy was facing so that you can determine, is this statistically significant as far as, 1, the sample size, obviously, but then 2, level of competition. So that's something that you can do in a strictly statistical standpoint. Again, that's on Baseball Reference. When you pull a player up, there's a box for spring training stats from this year, and that is the very last column in that box. So all the spring training stats we give today, I'll have that opponent quality measure for you as well. If you are lucky enough to get to go to spring training and to see some of this stuff in person, or you're able to watch some of these games, there's 2 kind of aspects that I would look for when you're trying to evaluate a guy in spring training. The first one is going to be changes, right? What is different now from him the last time you saw him or at the end of last season? It could be something where maybe a hitter has taken some of the extra stuff out of his swing. He got rid of a bat wrap. He got rid of an arm bar. He changed his stance to open it up a little bit more. So what has changed? This kind of especially work, body-wise, conditioning. Maybe somebody dropped some weight. Maybe somebody added some muscle, things like that. This is particularly interesting and useful, I guess, when you go and you look at pitchers. Because a lot of times in the offseason, that's where you'll see a pitcher add a new pitch. And like, for instance, on this, the Mariners, it's been most of the rotation of the Mariners added a new pitch over the offseason. Like, Luis Castillo is the only one I think that didn't do it. It's something where Robbie Ray added a splitter, which kind of gives a different look in his arsenal because he's mostly a fastball slider guy. He added a two-seam fastball last year, mid-season, which doesn't always happen. And then he came back with a splitter this year. So it's something a little bit softer, kind of goes to the arm side versus everything running to the glove side. A little bit visual, like a little bit of a different visual kind of picture for a hitter and a little bit of a tendency breaker. Logan Gilbert added a split change. Something where he hasn't really had a changeup that looked good, that he could throw well. And so he worked on it. He's got the split change. He feels a little bit better about this than some of the other changeups. And the whole thing with the split changeup is you can throw it like a fastball, right? You grip, you same arm speed, same arm action as a fastball, but because of the grip, because of the split finger grip, it performs differently. So it's as close to the fastball as he can, which helps him feel confident in the pitch. George Kirby added a splitter because he wanted something to kind of get weak contact. He already had 6 pitches, right? And it's something where, like, he threw everything kind of close to 10% of the time or more. So he added this splitter, something with a little bit more vertical break than a lot of his stuff has. His changeup's kind of a horizontal change, so he added the splitter to get some vertical break. Marco Gonzalez added a slider because he was doing the whole fastball cutter thing, and he wanted something that moved more than the cutter. And cutters and sliders tend to blend together a lot. When you throw a cutter a little bit, if you try to manipulate it to make it break a little bit more, it kind of morphs into a slider. And so this was just Marco Gonzalez being more intentional about, hey, instead of having a big cutter versus a small cutter, let me just throw my cutter and then deliberately develop a slider to go along with it. And then Chris Flexen added a slider because he just needed a breaking pitch. He had the curveball was kind of but like it mostly was a lot of fastball changeup stuff. And so he needed the breaking ball, so he worked out and he added the slider for it because he didn't really trust the changeup too much. So looking for new pitches is a big thing in spring if you're watching a guy and you see him throw something new. And then the other thing is watching for situations, right? You can't always, every spring training outing or at bat isn't necessarily illuminating as far as quality. Again, the opponent quality issues come into play, but maybe you see a young prospect, an arm on the mound, and he's able to face a big leaguer with a runner in scoring position, and he gets a strikeout. It's illuminative to see how his stuff works against that MLB quality hitter versus maybe he's typically a double-A guy. And so you haven't seen it against that quality of competition. I was watching Braves Phillies on Saturday night, and I watched Mick Abel go and strike out Matt Olson. I'm like, okay, that was a good pitch. I learned something there about Mick Abel because how his stuff went at the big league level against a big league guy. In just a minute, we've got questions about individual players, including Miguel Blythe of the Red Sox and Vaun Brown of the Giants, 2 outfielders that are very, very talented and promising. But first, today's episode is brought to you by our friends with Ultimate Pro Baseball GM. This has been a really fun app and a new fun partner to have in the Locked On Podcast Network. So I mentioned it at the top, but if you've dreamt of like becoming an MLB GM, managing a franchise, building a team through free agency, or like most prospectors who listen to this show through the draft and international free agency, then like this is the game for you because you can manage every aspect of your team. You're going through the season, you're simulating the season. You're not actually playing the baseball games. You're just building the team and letting the computer play the games and give you the results. And so the time investment is a little bit different because you don't have to manually click through 9 innings of a game 160 times in a season, right? So you choose the coaches and staff, and this kind of goes back to you can look at tendencies and have the way you want to play the game. Are you a 3 true outcomes? You're hitting for power. Are you focused on contact ability and base running? Like, what are you doing? And then you have to manage the team finances to have the money to sign players in free agency that match those characteristics that you've hired for your staff. You also have to scout and draft players. And whenever you're looking at adding players, whether it's free agency, whether it's the draft, anything like that, you have to manage the personalities as well. You have to keep the morale up. If you're in a rebuild and you're losing a lot, your players' morale starts to go down, and that can impact the team and impact the fan satisfaction and things like that. It's a very realistic world about how a Major League Baseball franchise runs from the outside, right? It's challenging, but it's fun. But what I love about it is Ultimate Baseball GM is completely free. You can play it offline. You don't have to have internet connection to play. So it's on the go when you want, whenever you want. It doesn't keep track of how much time has elapsed in the real world to let you do certain things. It's just when you log in, you pick up where you left off. Locked On MLB Prospects listeners get a 100% free boost to your franchise when you use the promo code LOCKEDON, all caps, in the game store. So be sure to check it out. To download the game, probaseballgm.com. If you're on YouTube, you can scan the code on the screen, or you can look it up in any of the app stores. Again, probaseballgm.com for the Ultimate Baseball GM app. Start your dynasty today. Okay, so questions. All of these questions for these individual players came from listeners of the show. Most of them came from our Locked On MLB Prospects Discord. So Brian asked about Red Sox outfielder Miguel Blythe. And okay, one of the highest ceilings of any player in the Red Sox system. 2021 IFA, I want to say they gave him about $1.5 million in January 2021. Stands 6'2", 180, got 40 games in rookie ball last year. So he spent 21 in the DSL, in the Dominican, and then spent 2022 in the Complex League. So started midsummer and played out there. 301, 353, 542 for Miguel Blythe in those 40 games. 5 home runs, 23 extra base hits, 10 walks to 45 strikeouts, and 18 to 21 on stolen bases. Again, one of the highest ceilings in the system. We don't really have a floor because he hasn't even been in the full season affiliate yet, but I feel like the floor is going to end up being pretty good. His speed is plus speed. His arm is a plus arm. I think that defensively, you put him in right field, he's going to be a plus defender in right. Feels like he's going to be above average in center, maybe plus. He seems to, again, he runs really well, kind of smooth, long strides. The instincts feel like they're pretty good. I haven't been able to watch a whole lot of Complex League stuff from last year. When you do, you usually get a high home camera, and that's all you got. So it's kind of hard sometimes to pick out the nuances of a guy in the outfield, but feels like the defense is pretty good. Offensively, though, this is where the all-star potential ceiling comes in. Massive, massive raw power. Like probably one of the highest raw power guys or biggest raw power guys in the Complex League in Florida last year. So when he gets a hold of one, he can absolutely crush a ball. Now, that being said, we always say it on this show, your power tool's only as good as your hit tool, right? It all comes back to the hit tool. He's got a higher swing strikeout rate. It's like over 25%. And a lot of it comes back to swing and miss on breaking balls. Now, again, he was also 18 years old in a new country for the first time. So that's something where I really want to see how he does in a full season affiliate. 27% strikeout rate. The walk rate was around 6% or so. So it's a guy who it feels like he's always, like, if this is who he is, he's going to have like above average strikeouts, below average walks, he's going to have to get better with the pitch recognition, right? He's going to have to improve the swing decisions so that you can get all of that power into the game. He's played in spring, 1 for 6 this spring, 2 RBIs, 4 strikeouts. I think his one hit was a home run. I'm not sure. And so the opponent quality was 6.9, which comes out, right below a double A. Double A is a 7. So, 1 for 6, 4 strikeouts. Again, incredibly small sample size, but something where Miguel Blythe has a huge ceiling, and it's all down to what the hit tool does as far as does he reach that ceiling or not. We would have seen him in Low A Salem last year. He had a back injury. One of the guys I'm going to be watching very closely, because if he can come even remotely close to putting it together, it dramatically raises the ceiling of this Red Sox farm system and the future prospects in a couple seasons when they can get him to the bigs. Stodgy Seltzer in our Discord asked about Giants outfielder Vaun Brown, and he's another one of those young, not as young, but one of those dynamic outfielders that we kind of have a lot of questions about how high the ceiling could be, but I do feel like we know more about his floor being good. So 2021 10th rounder out of, I think it was Division II Florida Southern, but 103 games last year between A-ball, high A, and like 1 game in double A. So it technically doesn't even really count. But 346, 437, 623 for Vaun Brown. I listened to too many space documentaries about the Apollo program, Vaun Brown. For Vaun Brown, 23 home runs in 103 games, 54 extra base hits. So there's an extra base hit every other game thing. 47 walks to 119 strikeouts and 44 of 50 on stolen bases. Defensively, speed is phenomenal. He is an amazing athlete. He's like 6'2", 220, and when you watch him, he looks like a linebacker running around the outfield. Just a massively huge human being. Incredible shape, incredible fitness. So incredibly fast, 70 grade speed. So easily double plus speed. The arm is kind of average, but I think the defense is above average simply because that speed's so good. He's played all 3 positions. So he's played left, he's played center, he's played right. The arm only being average, he's probably going to be a little bit stretched as far as right field is concerned when it comes to you like having a right footer with a big arm to get guys trying to go first to third on a base hit and things like that. But the speed definitely helps as far as the overall quality of the defense. Offensively, he's got a super busy swing. There's a lot of stuff in there. He's toned it down a little bit, but it's still just, there's a lot of moving parts in that swing. And so because of that, you see him struggle with fastballs up in the zone. You see him struggle with breaking stuff away, off speed. And I do want to see him at in an age appropriate level. He was 24 last year between low A and high A. And so I do a little bit older than the average age in those levels. So I do want to see what he does. I expect him to be in Double A Richmond this year. This spring, 1 for 5, a solo home run and 4 strikeouts. So really good opponent quality, 8.3, but I'm just not sure how illuminative that is as to what you can expect out of him because it's an incredibly small sample size, 1 for 5, right? So want to see Vaun Brown in Double A Richmond. I feel like you're probably looking at a guy who can be an everyday outfielder, can contribute both offensively and defensively, but kind of like Miguel Blythe, the ceiling depends on where is the hit tool, where does it end up. In just a second, I've got 2 pitchers and a corner infielder for the Yankees that's been a little bit controversial in the past. But first, today's episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. The NCAA tournament is heating up. We have finished the first weekend of the tournament. We're now on to, I think it's the Sweet 16. So perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. New customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. So download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. Safe, secure, super easy to use. You can bet on everything from the money line, point scores, threes drained, all of the core markets like the spread, the money line, the total, and player projections, player props like points or rebounds or assists or combined totals. But then they have some exclusive things that are just theirs, like the 2x3. Will there be 2 3-pointers scored in the first 3 minutes of this game? And then you can combine all of your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same game parlay. So don't miss your chance to get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets back when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network. Okay, Bacon in our Discord, his name is Bacon, that's fine, asked about Yankees corner infielder Andrew Chaparro. And really interesting situation here. So 2015 IFA, got 71 games in last year between A-ball and AA. 296, 370, 592, 20 home runs, 37 extra base hits, 25 walks to 58 strikeouts, and 4 of 4 on stolen bases. And last year was kind of really his breakout. He had struggled, especially before the loss 2020. Really didn't do a lot offensively. I want to say in high A in 2019, he batted like 246, 360, 330, something like that. So really kind of picked it up last year, killed it in low A Tampa with the Tarpons, and got moved to Somerset pretty quickly. But 15 games in spring. I think this is what prompted the question. 15 games in spring. 321, 424, 750. 4 home runs. Those are the only extra base hits he has is home runs. 4 walks to 7 strikeouts, no stolen base attempts. The opponent quality was 6.6. So right there around that level for AA. AA is 7. So in essence, it was a continuation of him being in AA last year. I expect him to go to Scranton Wilkes-Barre this year. The reason why I mentioned him being a little controversial, there was actually a kind of a famous little spat between him and Keith Law of The Athletic, because Keith Law talked about he's like 50 pounds over his listed weight. And it was a little bit of, it was not well received. Chaparro took to Twitter and was like, everybody's got to understand that all players are different. As you know, with 50 pounds more or less, everybody can contribute in their own way. Not all of us can be fast or, you know, have the best defense or the best playing instinct or hit bombs or shoot fastballs. Everybody's different, right? And so it was just a little bit of an awkwardness, but I do think we have to acknowledge that, one, he is bigger than 6'1", 200. We need to update that at this point. But he does have a ceiling, like a cap on the ceiling because of the size, the physical build. And he's been playing both third base and first base. I think in the future he's going to end up being a first baseman. Last year he played 48 games at third and AA and 14 games at first. I do think going forward, especially with how many guys the Yankees have that can play third base, not only right now, but also in the future, I really do think he's going to end up being a first baseman. And if he does, obviously you have Rizzo there right now. Going to take a little bit of time. I expect him to move to AAA Scranton Wilkes-Barre this year. And again, massive power. He's limited the strikeouts recently, just kind of based off of his prior time in the minors. And so I think the ceiling is higher. I think if he has a good year in AAA, you'll see him hit the back half of the top 30 lists for a lot of different organizations or a lot of different prospect evaluating companies, and could see him as an option if there's an injury to a first baseman and they want to call somebody up if Rizzo's out, versus using Oswaldo Cabrera there like they use him everywhere else. I could see Andrew Chaparro getting called up and getting a chance. Captain Dangerous in our Discord asked about Gregory Santos of the White Sox. 6'4", 240, 2015 IFA. He's got 5 1/3 innings this spring, 3 hits, 8 strikeouts. Opponent quality is 7.6, so somewhere between AA and AAA. 35 games last year in AAA, so it kind of tracks that that's the level that he's in. 4.63 ERA in 35 innings pitched, 37 strikeouts, 9.5 per 9, 220 walks, 5.1 per 9, 4 home runs allowed. His repertoire here, power fastball, shape isn't great on the fastball. The movement profile isn't great on the fastball, but he can touch 100 with it, which is always a useful trait. And then has a slider to go along with it. The big things that he needs to do to have a better impact for the White Sox this year is, one, he needs to stay healthy. He's missed time in a lot of seasons with different little, like whether it was once he finally got past some of the command issues that held him back his first year or two, he missed like most of 2019 because shoulder and hamstring. He didn't pitch a ton in 2021, and then missed a little bit of time with some nagging stuff last year. Came up and actually got like 3 2/3 innings at the bigs. Also a 4.91 ERA, coincidentally, but just needs to stay healthy. And then 2, cutting down on the walks. I mentioned 5.1 walks per 9. A lot of it seems like when he's pitching from the stretch, he struggles with the control. And so obviously that builds on itself, right? You get a guy gets on, you have to switch to the stretch. Now your stuff isn't as good. You struggle with the control and you just let more guys on. You have the ability for an inning to get away from you very quickly. So cutting down on the walks, I think, is going to come back to getting more effective out of the stretch. Last question on here. Brian asked about Astros pitcher Ronel Blanco. 2016 IFA, signed at the age of 22. 44 games in AAA last year after making the team out of spring training and then just getting sent back down. 3.63 ERA in 44 2/3 innings, 58 strikeouts, so 11.7 per 9, to 19 walks, 3.8 per 9, and 8 home runs allowed. Has a 4-seam fastball, can touch 97 or so, has a, like I mentioned earlier, a slider that kind of looks like a cutter, and then also has a changeup and a curveball. They're stretching him out to start. So he's pitched in 5 games this spring, 0.82 ERA in 11 innings pitched, 2 walks to 14 strikeouts, 1 home run allowed. The opposing quality was 6.6, so right there below AA. Not necessarily saying he's ready for the bigs at that point, but they're stretching him out to start this spring. We'll see what happens. He was 28 in AAA last year. He did get up into 6 1/3 innings in Houston before he got sent back down. But it's something where, again, signed at age 22 out of the Dominican for like $5,000. So it's a great story. If he's able to get up and stick at the big league level in any capacity, we'll be very happy for him. It's all going to come down to how, one, can he keep the velocity deeper into starts as they're stretching him out? And 2, can he get the changeup or the curve to be more effective so that he has a third pitch to throw to guys? So we'll see what happens there with Ronel Blanco, but very excited to kind of follow that story because it's a cool story. It's really exciting. He was in the debuts book from James Bailey. We talked about that on Friday's show. He's in there, and it kind of covers some of the story if you want to know more about it. Last question came in very last minute before I sat down to record, so we haven't even really researched this yet. But dynasty baseball question. He's rebuilding right now. He has Corbin Carroll, and he has been offered a 6-player package to give up Corbin Carroll. Oscar Colas, Harry Ford, Cade Horton, Marcelo Mayer, James Outman, Colton Cowser. He's in exchange for Corbin Carroll and pitcher Josiah Gray, which is fine. Would love to get your thoughts on this. And as somebody who's rebuilding his own dynasty team right now, I inherited a team that was not very great. Rebuilding that team, as much as I hate to lose Corbin Carroll, you have to look at the competitive window. Can you be back in contention in 1 season, in 2 seasons? How long is it going to take? If you think you can be competitive in the next, year or 2, then maybe it's worth holding on to Corbin Carroll because the ceiling is so high for the most part, we know Corbin Carroll's ceiling, right? The rest of it is all of these guys are. Colas is going to debut this year, but these are all, for the most part, except for Outman, these are all minor leaguers, and you don't quite know what their ceiling's going to be. The goal of acquiring prospects in dynasty fantasy baseball is to find guys who can contribute at the major league level. You're holding one of those now, but if it's going to be a while before you're able to compete, or if your team is very, very bad and you need an influx of talent, that's not a bad package. Harry Ford looked really promising with Great Britain in the World Baseball Classic. Colton Cowser looks like he could be up relatively soon. Oscar Colas, again, is going to be up relatively soon. James Outman, for the most part, is already up. And the big thing is you're not loading up on arms. When you're rebuilding a dynasty team, fade pitching and look for, instead of just trading for straight prospects, oftentimes I like to look for top prospects who have come up and struggled, like a Jared Kalenic, something like that, because they're usually a lot cheaper. But this is a very strong package for one, in essence, one player. Josiah Gray's in there, but this is a package for Corbin Carroll. So it's a personal decision. If it was me rebuilding my team, as much as I hate to do it, I probably take that package depending on how many prospect slots I have available and the talent level of my farm system. But it is different for every league. If you have more fantasy baseball questions, I can do my best, but we do have Locked On Fantasy Baseball now. These guys are great. They're part of the network. We did a crossover with them a couple weeks ago. Definitely go check them out wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube. Make them your second listen. Thank you for making Locked On MLB Prospects your first listen. Reminder, if you have questions for the mailbag, I'm on Twitter at Crosby Baseball. Show's on Twitter at Locked On Farm. You can email us, lockedonmlbprospects@gmail.com, or drop your questions in the Locked On MLB Prospects Discord. Links in the episode description, links in the show notes. That'll do it for Monday's show. Until tomorrow, it's always a good day to pay a minor leaguer.